Good evening, everyone. Well,
Good evening.
good evening. So glad to have all of you here this afternoon for this pressing forward conversation. I think this is our third conversation, and we've had some really good dialogue, a lot of good conversation during these sessions. So I want to say thank you to all who is here. And tonight we have a very dynamic guest, but we have a great topic that I think is very important for us to discuss right now, and that's having that uncomfortable conversation about race and diversity in the workplace. So I'm not going to delay because I feel like we're going to have a night of healthy dialogue, healthy conversation. So I want to go ahead and kick it off. But I do want to say that, you know, with all this going on within our world, with police brutality, racial injustice, everything that we see, even with the COVID-19 pandemic, it can't help itself but to spill over into the workplace. And you know, when I grew up, as growing up, my parents always said, there's two things you don't talk about, you go to work. You don't talk about politics, you don't talk about religion. But you know, we're in the 21st century now, and I think we always are asked to bring our whole selves to work. We're asked to bring our authentic self to work. And so you can't really do that if you can't have these uncomfortable conversations. So I think all of us have a little anxiety when we have to have them or avoid them altogether. So tonight I'm excited that hopefully we can unpack that and really everybody can walk away from here empowered to have some critically crucial conversations, because I always say the beauty is in the conversation. One of the tips that we talked about as far as healing a nation, where we at, is that diversity in understanding, not diversity and understanding, but diversity in understanding. And the only way you can understand the plight of others is you have to listen to them. You have to hear what they say, have a conversation. That's where the beauty really takes place. So let me give you the rundown of tonight. So tonight, your co-host with me is Miss Stacia DeBerry Jackson. Stacia, why don't you say hello to the group? Did Stacia leave us? Oh,
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. How are you?
Stacia is a marketing entrepreneur with the Berry Tree Marketing. Stacia, why don't you give the group a little bit, 45-second intro about yourself?
Hi, how are you again? As Patrick mentioned, I have a boutique marketing firm called the Berry Tree Marketing and Strategy. Additionally, I've just transitioned to a new role as Executive Director of Marketing Communications for Rowan Cabarrus Community College. So yes, I do both.
Thank you so much. So Stacia,
it's always good to have be able to follow your passions on the side.
Thank you. So Stacia will be keeping us honest and keeping us on track this evening. She will be monitoring the chat. She will be doing a lot of administrative functions to help help tonight's conversation be more productive and more meaningful. I want to go ahead and introduce our keynote or our guest panelist this evening. It's only one because this is such I think a rich conversation. Really want to have time to really have a real good conversation and dialogue. So I want to introduce Ms. Kim Jackson. Kim Jackson is a lively human resources enthusiast with a passion for uplifting organizational culture by joining and connecting with people. With over 10 years of experience in private, public, and nonprofit, she specializes in developing strategy and programs that connects the people factor with the levers that drive business optimization. So let me tell you how tonight's going to work. So tonight, it's going to be a Q&A session between Kimberly and myself around uncomfortable conversations in the workplace. And Also, throughout the session, Stacia will be launching several poll questions for you to answer so that you can answer them. And then we'll have dialogue, and that'll create dialogue as we get down further into the conversation. We want this to be very interactive. So at the end of each question, if there's a question you want to drop in the chat, or if you want to save all your questions for at the end, please feel free to drop that question in the chat, and Stacia will let us know that you've done that, and we will try to call on you as best that we can. So, Miss Kim, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you for having me, Patrick. Pretty nice intro. Thank you for that.
I'll let you go ahead and, I know I didn't do you justice, so I'll let you go ahead and do a little bit more about yourself if you would like to at this time.
Okay, well, I'm again so glad to be here on Race Report Results. My name is Kim Jackson. To what Patrick just explained, I have been in HR for over 10 years, actually closer to 15 years now. Passion is truly in people development, just how we interlink people, engaging with our people with the strategy of the business to really show that if without the people, the business does not exist. Have delivered quite a few different types of programs across my career in different sectors, including private, public, and nonprofit. And so just really excited to jump in. I was very grateful for Patrick to ask me to actually be on this segment tonight. So really excited about jumping in and hearing what everyone is thinking. And hopefully we can begin to break down some of those insecurities, some of those pensive anxieties we may have about jumping into these types of conversations in the workplace.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, you ready to get started, Kim?
I am.
All right, cool. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first question I have for you this evening is, as we get started, please, from your perspective, share with the group why you feel the conversation around race and diversity is so uncomfortable in the workplace.
That was a really great question, and I would say that from my experience and what has become evident in large bodies of research is that people really don't feel that it's safe to do so. You go, like you think about what you just said, we go, in our conversations that we go into these workplaces, primarily we think we need a job to sustain our livelihood. But we also go into these workplaces because we're looking to have someone to be in a place that really espouses our beliefs and allows us to flourish as individuals in the pursuit of our, life dreams. So when you go and start to have these types of things, come and become really prevalent in the workplace, it becomes a state of, how is this impacting me? Am I jeopardizing something that I need for other areas of my life, and so people become quite honestly feeling that it's not really safe to do so. And like when you think about it, when the topic of racial issues or issues around diversity come up in a workplace, it's not really typically associated with something that's celebratory. It's not like we're saying, oh, you know what, really congratulations on this thing that X, Y, and Z, affinity group did, or, did you, we're really talking about maybe something that happened in a religious perspective in someone's life. It's not really something that's come to the forefront of conversation in the workplace. It's typically when something has happened that's caused unrest or uneasiness that we're faced to have those kinds of conversations with our colleagues in the workplace.
That is so true. You make a great point when you say nobody is jumping up to talk about the color of somebody's skin or what that is a great point.
Yeah, it's not a point unless there's a problem, if you think about it.
That is a very good point. So in this 21st century, talk about why is it so important for employers to be transparent relative to race and diversity issues. And I think, and before you answer that, I think that question really came about because if you look, recently with George Floyd, a lot of companies have come out and made their stance about supporting Black Lives Matters and providing funding to support racial injustice. So talk to me about why you think that is important for employers to do.
Well, first, chiefly, Patrick, it's important for employers to be transparent anyway. You know, it does. So if you are only trying to feign transparency in one area, then, you know, it's not authentic. That means that you're hiding something else, right? So the practice should always be be transparent in all areas of your business strategy. When you're trying to engender your people to follow you and to contribute to drive into X, Y, and Z goals, and you have to say, what is your contribution is netting what for you? Why are you doing this? And this is what we're going to do with your contributions and how we're going to turn it back around and invest in the organization. So that level of transparency behind the business processes and the decision-making process should always be present. And it's even more imperative that it's present when we're talking about racial and diversity issues in the workplace, because now we're talking about individuals' sense of self and whether or not they're being valued and appreciated in the workplace. So that means that the employers, and not just the organizational employers, but those real relationships that we have with our direct managers and supervisors and people in our groups, they're going to take lead from what the organizational voice and messaging is going to be. And so in respects to what can I say in the workplace, what can I not say in the workplace, what can I propose that we do? So that transparency really sets the tone and tenor for what will become the culture, what will become what is acceptable and not acceptable in the workplace. And that's in respects to the question being focused on race and diversity.
That's good. So I want to take a pause, Kim, from asking some questions, and I want our lovely host, Ms. Stacia, to go ahead and launch our poll questions. And I'll pause right here to see if anybody has any questions about what Kim has shared so far. So please take time to answer that poll question. We will circle back to those near the end of our conversation this evening. So Kim, you know, we're talking a lot about it's uncomfortable. You're talking about it's uncomfortable to do it. Why is it uncomfortable? So what I know everybody on this call wants to hear tonight is talk to us about some of your strategies and your approach, you know, to make those conversations happen and to make them productive. I think that's what we all want to hear. We want to know, because everybody on this call is going to go to work tomorrow and say, let's talk about it. So.
I know that's right. So my approach is really a person first approach. So me first approach, I first approach. And the reason why is that regardless of what issue may be prevalent in your workplace, we have to stop and think, where do I stand? And how have I been contributing? What is my position? And the first question you ask yourself is, why is the thought of the conversation uncomfortable? That's the first position, because like we're saying, you know, having these uncomfortable conversations, what makes it uncomfortable? And the reason for it being uncomfortable differs between person to person and reason for reason. So start with you. And although like we wear all these different roles in our life, we wear all these different hats, the first and most primary role that we have is to be true to who we are and to represent that in everything that we do. And that goes into the relationships we choose to have, the conversations we have, the companies that we join, all of that is evident based off of, you know, the authentic self driving the decisions that we make. And the authentic self is also what's going to scrutinize a situation, is going to rationalize, or it's going to justify. So you need to sit down and have a real good, let me have a conversation with me. And when you do that, you look into the mirror and you ask yourself, you know, why am I uncomfortable with this thought? So it brings me to thought, what's her name? Dr. Vilna Tietler. She is a professor over at the Department of Black Studies over in California, Santa Barbara School of Sociology. So she has a definition for racism. And excuse me, I'm actually going to read this definition because I don't want to botch it up. So her definition for racism is a knowledge system, a way of knowing, perceiving, and interpreting the world and human beings that walk upon it. So the way we do it differs based upon, you know, what culture or society we're in. But that you extrapolate, and it goes into every other area. So that's also true for the way we interact with people in other constructs of reception, such as sexual orientation, gender, language, nationality. Is even how we make decisions about policies. It's based on our position in relations to that. So we need to stop and question, why is it uncomfortable? Where do I stand with this? Right? And so when you do that, you start to really dig down into, one, where your own level of maybe where biases may be sitting. Because a lot of times we're just operating on autopilot. And it's not just about the decisions that we're making in respects to race and diversity. It's also about the decisions that we're making. Like, I'll give you a prime example. You get so used to driving to work and you take this route every day, you get used to the traffic patterns, you get used to what time of day that if you leave you're going to have more congestion versus you can just shoot down the road, right? And what happens is, how many people, I'm not asking you to raise your hands, but feel free if you want to, we have a little reactions button down there, but how many people are guilty of getting to work and like, how did I get here? You drove on autopilot. You got so used to making certain decisions and certain turns and slowing down and speeding up at certain injunctions in your path that you just did it unknowingly. And it's only when something happens, hopefully your reaction time for that critical thought kicks in for you to say, oh, let me swerve or let me do this or that. So that's what we need to get into. How do we get off of autopilot for some of those unconscious biases that are driving our everyday decisions and actions and even inactions where we may be allowing things to like continue to go? So that's the first thing we do. So then another thing, like when you want to do like a reflective exercise for that is when you start saying, hey, why was I doing that? I didn't realize I was doing that. And things begin to become more evident to you. You can then ask yourself, like, let me do a quick little sample in life. And you look at that particular bias that you may be challenged with based on this, need in the office place and say, do I see this evident in other areas of my life? And since we're tonight talking about race and diversity, you may say, how many people of a certain ethnic group do I know? Like personally know? Can I pick up the phone and it won't be like, oh, why are you calling me? Like surprised to hear from me. Or how many people of a certain sexual orientation is in my immediate circle? Or have I ever stopped to actually sit down and learn about their life and in their struggles they may have, challenges they may have had being a person that identifies in a certain way? And if you find that you're kind of falling on the can't really call it, then maybe you are perpetuating certain biases, and if it's active in your personal life, it's 100% going to be active in your work life, right? So I call that the self-analysis stage, like check in on you first. Understand where you are, and that helps you to understand, start to get a glimpse into why is the thought of the conversation even uncomfortable? Because that is what's making the conversation uncomfortable, your perception thereof. The next thing you get into, in my approach to having these conversations, which I've had to have so many times throughout my career, just with
so Kim,
people for different reasons.
Real quick. So
yes.
You just said something I think was very powerful. So you're saying we make the conversation uncomfortable because we internalize it before we even verbalize it.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying? Powerful.
That's what we go into it with an expectation of it's going to be difficult because, and that because has something to do with whatever our base state of comfortability is. That's why it's difficult. How we perceive, this is what makes me comfortable. That is going against this. So now I'm uncomfortable. So now you have to question, why is this comfortable for you? Right? And it's the same thing we're asking the employers to do. Why has this been okay for you? And why is it taking so much for employers to begin to dig down and shift what their positions may have been, what their undercurrents and their cultures may have been, what they have been allowing to persist? Because it has been something that has worked for us. It hasn't caused any discomfort for us up until this point. So the next piece is like you start to get into more awareness of those biases, more awareness of your lack of critical thought, but your reliance on inactive thought, right? That's that autopilot that I was referring to. And now that you start to like really get into yourself, what happens is you start to find that you're making space for you to perceive something else, for another thought or idea to possibly be true, to possibly be relevant. And another sense of saying, you are creating a space of, you can say, vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Because now you have allowed yourself to become a little unsettled in what has been your assumptions for so long. This is true because, right?
And now most leaders don't like being in a vulnerable position. They do not like that.
Especially if you're talking about strictly in respects of in a role of leadership, meaning, remember I spoke before about those roles that we wear, those different hats. And when we define, and quite a lot of people do define themselves first in respects to what their role is or what a particular hat they're wearing means. For example, you may go, when the person comes into an interview, the interviewer may say, tell me about yourself. A lot of times people jump right in and they say, oh, I have a degree from such and such place, or I've been in such and such position. And they start to talk about all the things that should validate why you should bring them into that role. Well, that's kind of evident from your resume. That question is getting, tell me about you. And
Right.
that's the part we need to elevate and bring more into the workplace. It's not to say you need to bring in 99% of you every day, because, you know, that's not what the workplace is essentially for, right? It's not to say you can't, but it's not necessarily your goal. But you do want to bring more of you to be more authentic in all of your interactions in the workplace. So when you think about that vulnerability state and you remove the hat of the leader, and you just get into the individual that now has to have this conversation on behalf of the organization, but also have this conversation and make sure that this person is staying true to the vision, mission, and values that is supposed, the organization says that it purports and is supposed to be providing in this environment. So is it inclusive? Is it safe? Is it a place that supports growth and development opportunity for everyone? So how do you make sure that that true north is what you're going into the conversation with, unless you make space to have other people contribute to that, because that's what real inclusion is about. So not going into the conversation thinking, I'm going in to come out with a solution. You're going in to get an understanding and perspective of where there is a disconnect between, possible disconnect,
Right.
between what you're doing as a leader or a company and what the individual is saying is not healthy, or maybe a disadvantage, this causing them a disadvantage in the organization.
And I think you're raising some great topics. One of the, I do a lot of talks, and one of the points that I make, one of the tips is culture is the new currency.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And, you know, when I look at my mom and my dad, that generation, it was about how much you gonna pay me? You know, how much it, and don't get me wrong, money's always important. But today's employee is, to me, is more concerned about the culture. Can I bring my whole self to work? Can I be my authentic self? Do you have the same, do your values and your culture align with me?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why it is so important that organizations make it comfortable to have these type of conversations, because you could lose some good employees if they don't feel comfortable.
And that will bring you to the third part of the strategy, which is the exploration piece, right? So now the manager or leader is not comfortable, but has made space to hear, to perceive something different than what they've always assumed. Now you can get to having that shared experience, and you and your team, your direct one-on-one, whatever the other person or party may be, now you get to sit together and have that dialogue. You're both comfortable because you're on the same footing. One, you're both in a state of, let's say, vulnerability, right? Because you've gone through this process. How do I make sure I bring what is most important with the salient points to the table? So you have that vulnerability piece, so you're both willing to listen. And the empathy, when a person is empathic, they're more likely to be, vulnerable, they're more likely to be empathic. But the other piece is that you are both suspending the autopilot process. You're both coming into it from a position of active thought and active reception versus just bending everything based off of, innate triggers that we all have. So that third piece is where we begin to get, like you said, that diversity and understanding. Because now we're all open, we're all having the conversation, not necessarily just from the place of what the problem was that caused us to be here, but from a place of how have we all been accountable for that even being a problem in the first place, and how will we all be accountable for finding the solution to addressing that problem. So just to highlight, the first step in the strategy is that self-assessment, that self-position. And then you do a discovery piece for yourself, like where am I at? What questions do I need to ask myself in order to be open to have this conversation? Like basically removing a portion of my ego, so to speak, from the conversation. And the third one is the exploration piece. So now we're coming together and we're building together. We're on the same ground. So that would be the 3 steps for that particular strategy.
You guys, I'm going to hold 1 second. I think we have a question from the group. John, did you want to pose a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Kim's raising some really important material here. And I wonder if they often talk about the difference between a leader and a boss, that the boss is going to come in and say what he or she wants done. And it's all about their worldview and their knowledge. But a leader is more likely to be listening and asking and developing solutions together. And it seems like what you're describing, you got to be a leader or you're not going to be able to deal with race. A boss can't deal with race because they think they've got it all figured out.
So yeah, I agree with you. Thank you for that, John. You're talking about a strategist versus a tactician, right? So bosses, they deliver on the tactics that need to be delivered, that need to be executed, while the leader is like higher level. What's this tapestry we're trying to create here? And what do we need to do to drive it? Truly, thank you for that.
That's
so
a great,
much, John.
great point, John. And the other way I like to say that is one of my favorite interview questions is, tell me the difference between leading and managing.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Because anybody can manage a task or a function, but it's a whole different thing when you're talking about motivating, inspiring, and getting people to rally behind you. And that's where it goes back to, people won't follow you unless they know who you are, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great point. I think, Stacey, I think we have another comment in the chat.
Well, you guys are putting some really good comments in the chat. One of the things that I saw here, from one of our folks who are attending, it says she's right. We don't know the level of support we will receive from employers, which makes us to start compromising our values because of fear, the fear of loss of a position, livelihood, and so on. So I heard you mention that, Kimberly, and I thought that was a really, really good point.
Yeah. Thank you.
Patrick, would you like me to share the results of the poll that you all took a few moments ago?
You read my mind.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so the first question was, do you feel that there are racial inequalities in your company? 93. So we had 15 folks to actually take the poll. 93% of you said yes, 7% said no.
Can you launch it so we can see it?
Oh, sure. Here we go. Can you see those?
Wow.
Okay, so I'm just curious, like, just to throw it out there to the audience, anyone wants to jump on, for those who said no, could you give, really share with us about the culture of your employer and what you think is making it work so that there are no racial inequalities in your workplace?
Don't be shy.
Okay, fair enough.
Has anyone raised their hand, Stacia?
No, I didn't. Oh, no one's raised their hand to respond.
I'll go.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, John.
Well, now, I'm a solo consultant and I do communication training for affordable housing advocates. But I thought I'd base my answer on my number one client, which is a major affordable housing developer in Los Angeles. I'm coaching one of their senior leaders. She's African American, and I've heard so much from her about how she walks into the room, she's the only one there. When she advocates for diversity, they're like, yeah, that's good, but we got a job to do. Or, well, yeah, that's right, but we can't talk about it right now. And they're all white, so of course they don't understand. It's part and parcel of who she is and what she brings to the office. And frankly, the richness that could inform their decision making, their discussion, all the things going on without the diversity and the attunement to culture and race that we all know is the only way to get to the goal. It's when they don't want to listen. Maybe it comes back to that tactician, strategist, different Patrick you mentioned.
I agree. Thank you, John.
All right. So, anymore? I'm gonna go ahead and ask you another question. So Kim, one of the things to tee up this next question, my 23-year-old daughter, she's a millennial, right? And so when the whole George Floyd thing happened, there was it was a rash on social media about Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the employees said, they told us, we can't wear Black Lives Matter paraphernalia to work.
Mm-hmm.
So I drink Starbucks coffee. And so I was on my way. My daughter said, I know you're not going to Starbucks. And I said, well, why wouldn't I go to Starbucks? And she said, did you not see that they won't let the people that wear Black Lives Matter paraphernalia? And I
Yeah.
said, I did see that. So let's sit down and talk about it. And I talked to her about, I said, that didn't really bother me because I know where I work, I can't wear Black Lives Matter paraphernalia. And on the same, a Ku Klux Klan or a white supremacist can't wear their paraphernalia to work too, because every company has what? They have policies, they have dress code and dress attire. And so, you know, she just kind of looked at me and I said, so I'm not really that perplexed about that, because if you probably poll most large organizations across this country, there is some type of policy that governs wearing paraphernalia, especially when it's, you know, it could be that controversial. So that just leads me, but the funny thing is, and so the next day she said, you're going to Starbucks, bring me a Frappuccino back. But anyway, but that tees up to the next question I have is, how do employers make decisions about what employees can display in the workplace specific to their personal beliefs, and how they bring that into the workplace? And get more specifically, you know, some companies they allow for these affinity groups, you know, and different things, and have different groups that can meet. So can you talk about, I think it's good for all of us to hear how companies make those decisions and help everybody understand that, you know, that is par for the course.
All right, well, one, thank you for sharing that story. It's a nice little levity, right? The Starbucks situation that did just happen in June, and what it showed us here is, well, for one, when you talk about policies as far as what a person can display in terms of their specific personal beliefs, there is some protections for that on a federal level in respects to a person's religious attires and grooming and such like that. But outside of that, it really comes down to the discretion of the organization. After all, these organizations are, you know, privately owned and, you know, held, many of them, unless an organization may be receiving funding for affirmative action, so much money coming in through government contracts, then you start to get into play where there's more guidance from the government on what can and cannot be done, or in terms of restricting employees. So let's just, you know, speak about Starbucks and even your organization. I think those are two great comparatives. So what happened with Starbucks is this. You're right. They said you can't wear the Black Lives Matter, right? And employees said, well, they're wearing LGBTQ. Right? So what we have there is disparate treatment, and that you can't do across the board. It doesn't matter how much money you get from the government or how private you are. If you're employing people in the United States, they are protected for that. And that falls under what that is oftentimes aligned to things that are protected through Title VII. So you have that disparate treatment. And what that said is, Starbucks said, we're okay with people lobbying or not lobbying, displaying their beliefs and support for the LGBTQ movement and community. And let's be real, there has been upheaval and unrest for that group for the past, 50 years, documented at least in this country as far as the civil rights movement, and where there have been riots, there have been fights, there have been murders, there have been everything under the sun that you could say has happened in respects to what we're looking at now. We're going to call it Black Lives Matter. But so Starbucks, you know, I would say Starbucks took a position that was very knee-jerk and saying, disassociate yourself with something that in society appears to be negative and not for our brand. And one of their walk-back statements was that, you know, we didn't want to potentially attract any adverse actions from the rioting and stuff that's going on. Well, that was happening regardless whether you had people wear the shirts or not. Let's be honest. If your store was going to get hit, it was going to get hit. Right. But so that was what you call disparate treatment. And it comes down to how those leaders in Starbucks at that time interpreted what their policy for expression would be in their company. How they interpreted what supported their position and their brand versus what didn't. And that right speaks of volume. Again, that was not critical thought. That was autopilot. That was what makes us comfortable. Right, this is comfortable. Right. This wasn't comfortable. And that very thought triggered a chain reaction that now they have to walk back, do, reassess what their brand position is, put extra money into making sure people feel that they really do support Black Lives Matter. So to get back to the question, I had to touch on it. You brought it up. That right there was a doozy, right? It comes down, quite honestly, the employer can set whatever policy they want to set, so long as it doesn't go against people's rights under Title VII and other protective laws when we've got, age, disability and such. And as long as whatever policy they enact, it is treated the same across all comparative groups. So as far as when you say what type of affinity groups and what can they do meetings, all of that will fall under the same doctrine and same philosophy that the employer will apply across the board.
Kim, this is Stacia. I just want to interrupt. For those who may not know, could you elaborate on Title VII?
Okay, so for Title VII, those are during the civil rights era, when we were fighting, Black people primarily fighting for rights, equality, Title VII was established. And that means that basically it protects people's employment rights and fair opportunity for equal employment. And you cannot be discriminated based on your race, your creed, your nationality, your ethnicity, your gender. And I missed one, race, creed, ethnicity, gender, family status. Yeah. Now you have LGBTQ that was incorporated back in June, and I am missing one. I apologize, but that's just because I'm going to the top of my head. If anyone has it, throw it in the chat. But those are religion. Thank you. Okay. Those are the protected classes on a federal level. Now, no state can supersede those, but states can have something that's more stringent or that can, complement those protections.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Stacia, why don't you go ahead and show our next results from our second poll question?
Well, we haven't launched the second poll. I'll launch it right now.
Okay. Well, go ahead and launch it, and the third one.
Now, I don't know if I can launch them both simultaneously, but okay. I did just launch the second.
All right. So Kim, Align. So talk about your position, or how do you feel like employers should create policy to deal with employees whose views are in conflict with the company's brands, values, policies, and culture? And that was the other thing that my daughter and I unpacked too, is, I tend to look at it. So here locally in the Charlotte area, there's a security company here that their CEO made some pretty harsh statements after the George Floyd incident. They were insensitive and the timing just wasn't right. So they lost a lot of major sponsors. They actually provided security for my house, and I called real quick and changed my security company. And so, and that's why my daughter was still trying to understand the difference in that and Starbucks. And I had to tell her, because she said, a first strike was up in, I think it was Philadelphia, New Jersey, when the manager kicked the African-Americans out. And so it's one thing you got to talk about is you can't help who you hire. I mean, you try your best to go through an interview process, you do your best, you test them, you set them out. But, a lot of these things are hitting, they're hidden until something like a George Floyd incident happens, or whatever the incident is that brings those emotions, those feelings out. So, and then that's when organizations have to make decisions. But how can they get proactive, I would say, to address when individual positions don't align with the company?
The individual's positions don't align with the company. Well, I would say you're going to always have an instance where you can't make everyone happy, right? But I would say first and foremost, what an organization needs to do is make sure that they have established and communicated and basically holds people accountable to what the company's mission, vision, and values are. That is the identity of the organization. And that identity will attract employees or prospective employees who will be a good fit and help support and drive that mission, vision, and value of the corporation. It's not to say that there's never going to be an opportunity for the corporation to stop and say, hey, maybe we need to look at this a little bit more closely. Maybe there's a value set that we can, incorporate as we evolve, as the society evolves, to make sure that we continue to be that quote unquote employer of choice, the employer that has known for being inclusive and progressive and provide, opportunities for equal opportunities, equity, I should say, for everyone to be successful. So that's the first thing that employers need to do. Before you even try to hire someone, make sure you have that right, because that's what's going to attract those employees. And when you begin to attract, quote unquote, who you are, you may find that you have less instances of there being a disconnect or possible issue with a belief, overt belief disparities, concern with your employees. And you're right, you don't know the ins and outs of every person that you hire. And so you may have this situation arise where someone's like, hey, I really stand by this. We really need to do this, or the company needs to, take this into consideration. And the first thing that any responsible leader and employer should do is stop. Listen. It's not going to hurt you to listen. That's the very first thing you do. The person may not be communicating in the best way. They might be a little irate. Don't know, but the first thing an employer can do is stop and listen. Give the common courtesy of just saying, hey, you have something to say, I'm going to listen to you. And then we talk about making that space again for there to possibly be another way of seeing something, another perspective, that maybe it's not, maybe although we have these what we perceive to be or think are sound practices and policies and procedures, maybe there's room for growth. Maybe there's room or opportunity for us to expand that in another way, or maybe as a lens that we hadn't seen before. And when you do that, once you stop and listen, you learn more about where the employee is coming from, get their understanding. And I'm not saying that you have to say that we're here to judge if it's valid or not valid, but what you have already done is establish this is who this organization is. This is why this organization is. This is and these are the values that we espouse as organization and we hold ourselves and our employees accountable to. This is how we interact with the community, and you're bringing this in, and let us see, does this really support it? Does it still fall in? Is there opportunities on either side, right? So that's the second thing you do. Now you're looking at the policies, and you might find that we can tweak something, or maybe there's an exception somewhere, or maybe it's just not something that for our organization, this is something that we are going to be able to support or incorporate. That's very possible. It's not saying just because somebody screams about it means that you have to do it, but you do listen, you consider. That's like you said, diversity and understanding piece. And the third part is that you make sure, and this should be throughout, but the key point is regardless of where the organization or leader lands, based on what has been presented, and this goes back to that transparency piece, go back, speak to the employee, speak to the group, whoever it is, and let them know this is what we did in listening to you and thinking about it and applying and considering it for the organization. And this is where the decision we've made and what we can do or we will not be able to do. And be transparent in that. And quite honestly, it's at-will employment. The same way you didn't have to hire them and keep them hired. If the employee feels like I can't be here, they can leave. But do the due diligence as an employer and as a leader to be open to make sure that did we really vet and see, are we doing something that could be causing disparate impact or disparate treatment? Are we doing something that may be insensitive? Or is there unconscious bias at play in the undercurrent of our culture that we may be unaware of? So when you think about it, those are the steps the employer should do. Listen, look at it against the values, missions, and vision and policies of the companies. Is there a precedent in the company? Is there something comparative you can look at? Is there something we can do? Does it really continue to support where we're going and our identity and our brand? And go back and have that conversation. Maybe go through another round. But those are the 3 steps to really looking to see how do you address if there's a conflict of a person's beliefs or maybe even political position, whatever the case may be, with the policies of the organization.
Thank you so much, Kim. And I'm so glad. We've got about 10 minutes left. And so there's a couple of things I want to do really quick. I do want to share the results results of the second poll question, but we are getting some really good comments over in the chat here. Kim, a lot of folks are just really excited about all of the great information that you are sharing. I'm seeing some things in here about, making sure people understand the difference between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, making sure that that is where the conversation is starting. And so, it's.
I think that's Sonia. Does Sonia want to kind of speak to that a little bit? Because I think
Yes.
that's a great point.
Mm-hmm. Sonia, do you want to talk about that? I just know you put it in comments. Do you want to speak about it?
She's probably calling me a couple choice words right now for calling me.
Sonia, I'm going to. Okay.
And I am, Patrick. No, but really and truly, I was just saying that, that's really, to me, that's where the conversation starts. And, while I live that, and, as a Black person, we all live that. There really are people who don't get or don't understand the difference between those two phrases. But what we also have to do, to me, is that we have to be willing to listen, because it's got to start somewhere. It's almost like it's never enough for us.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's got to start somewhere. And so we've got to be sensitive to that as well. This is this was ingrained in me, like Patrick started this whole conversation off. You keep quiet. You don't talk about religion. You don't talk about race. You don't talk about politics at work. So I'm old school. That was ingrained in me. So I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and just all of a sudden now, I'm wanting to talk about these things, when I am uncomfortable. I'm more than uncomfortable. So to me, it's just got to be a conversation that starts somewhere. I think that is a great place to start. But again, it's got to go both ways. We can't be closed-minded as well to just the Black Lives Matter, even though that is a very true statement.
Sonia,
thank you for saying. I'm sorry.
I'm glad you brought that up, because to be honest, that question is what ignited this talk tonight. I had one of my direct reports. She's a Caucasian female, and we had our one-on-one. And at the end of it, she said, "Patrick, I need to ask you something." She said, "You may just tell me, get out of my office. That's none of your business. Don't go there. You're out of line." And I said, "Shoot," because I always say it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Mm-hmm. And she says, "Why?" And she paused. I said, "Just say it. Why do Black people get so mad when white people say all lives matter?" And I said, "Thank you for asking me that question." And I'm gonna do this real quick, because I'm gonna give it back to Kim. And I said, but before I answer that question, I'm gonna say a name. I said, Colin Kaepernick. And she said, "Yeah, did you agree with how he disrespected the flag?" I said, see, now I said, I got to give you this analogy. I said, Colin Kaepernick from the day one said he was doing that to protest police brutality. Everybody else, I'm 45, and everybody else created the narrative of he was disrespecting the flag. And I said, but I'm gonna try to compartmentalize this real quick for you so you get it. I said, "Have you ever attended a sporting event before?" She said, "Of course." I said, "So I've seen white people, Black people, orange, yellow, be disrespectful during the flag. I've seen people drinking a beer while the national anthem's been played. I've seen people with their hat on, they won't stand up." And she's like, "I never thought about that." And she said, "But why did he choose that?" And then she said, "That's his I said, "It's his platform to protest peacefully police brutality." I said, "But I'm a son of a church deacon." And I said, and for me, what I knew, my daddy, anytime he prayed, whether he was in public, in private, whatever, he got on his knees, because that's how he gave reverence. So I said, to me, it wasn't being disrespectful. He was giving reverence to me. And I said, I still think it was a peaceful way to do it. But I ended to say, but if all lives matter, we wouldn't have to have the conversation that Black lives matter. And I said, my last point to you is this: your neighborhood, you live in a neighborhood. She said, yes. I said, your house is on fire. You call the fire department. Do you want them to go? We gonna come back. We know you're on fire. Let's go check everybody, all the houses in the neighborhood. No, your house is on fire right now. You want them to come to your house. Black folks' house is on fire right now. So that's why we say that you know, that's why it's very offensive. But that conversation was the most productive and healthy conversation. And she said, you just gave me so much insight that I never considered. And I said, that's why it's always important to have. That's why I say, I learned to say that's what the beauty in the conversation. Stacey, go ahead and share those results so Kim can talk about those results.
Absolutely. So it says, do you want to have a meaningful conversations at work about the issues around race and diversity? And 68% of you said, yes, you do. 5% say, no, you don't. And 47% of you say, only with people I trust. I wanted, Patrick, if it's okay with you, I know we're rounding out on time here, but I would love to hear from someone who said, no, I do not want to have those conversations at work. And then I would love to hear from one more person that said, only with people I trust.
Come on, folks, give us a little dialogue. Sonia, thank you for jumping off the cliff. We're having great dialogue.
Yeah. Does anybody who there was one person that said, no, they don't want to have that conversation. Do you mind sharing? Okay, no worries. Anybody that said only with people I trust? Does anybody, 9 people said that. Is there anybody that wants to just share about that really quickly? All right. Well, we're
this is a great example right here. This is a great example. People feel like, is it okay to speak up and say something? Why? Or, you know, Brandon, when we give out anonymous surveys, people expect to remain anonymous. And anyone who's ever been in anything I have facilitated, more than likely I'm gonna call a name anyway. But the thing is, we need to all be modeling the very behavior that we expect, the very behavior we're asking for. We can't be afraid to step out there, like in Patrick's example, his colleague did. She allowed herself to be vulnerable. She didn't know what answer was going to come from Patrick. She had no idea how he was going to respond, but she sought understanding. And when she sought that understanding, she got a perspective, like we talked about the definition of race that I gave earlier, that helped her to see that all this time she had been dismissing what was already evident in front of her. Like she did, like Patrick's example with the people drinking and not taking off their hats. That was okay. But when someone who appeared to be not in her group did something against something that she found to stand or went against a narrative, that caused her to have a problem. But she still said, let me go in and ask Patrick this question. So here we are as a group of individuals who found that this would be a topic that we need to talk about, something that we need to learn about how to have these conversations. Not that we have to have them, but how to have them. And in this group, we should still right now be comfortable to speak up and say, hey, this is why I answered this way to the survey. This is what I'm thinking, what I'm experiencing. And we can all say, maybe, hey, thank you for sharing that. Here are some ideas that maybe has worked in this organization where I have worked, or this is where the collective builds the solutions to the problem versus us all just speaking about it. We don't want to just cast stones because then there's no house for anyone to live in, right? We want to come in and say, how can we build something that's made of a more stable and resounding structure?
Perfect. And Kim, thank you so much for that. So I'm going to launch the last polling question here. We got about 4 minutes left, so we want to be cognizant of everyone's time. So I am going to launch that poll right now.
So if everyone would take that real quickly. You guys are great. I mean, y'all are popping these. I think we got a question.
Well, I was gonna give a response to the last survey where everybody was kind of answering. So I answered as only with people that I would trust. So me personally, being a black man in HR, a lot of us aren't. It's not a whole bunch of us in corporate America. So that already for myself, I feel like what I do, what I say, my actions that will be tied to the rest of African Americans in HR. And being in an organization that is predominantly white, sometimes come across as I don't want to be that mad or that African American person. At least that's how I feel I'll be perceived if I do speak out or say something.
The angry
And
black man?
being, I'm sorry.
The angry black man syndrome.
Yes. But then I think part of it too, speaking back to what Kim mentioned earlier, as far as the safety piece of it, is being in an organization that is predominantly white, you may feel like, well, I'm kind of nervous to kind of step out there and really truly say how I feel when I don't know how it's going to be perceived. So let me build trust with somebody. And then let me make sure I have my footing in place and kind of see how that works out. And then from there, maybe now I can branch out a little bit further in the organization because I've tested out the waters. So I guess that's kind of my initial thoughts. And I think another reason why I kind of want to trust somebody more is even I think the current climate has caused me and a lot of people to kind of go back into their shell a little bit more, because me personally, I've seen actions, or I guess you could say lack of action or lack of
Is he frozen for everyone?
Yeah, I think he's frozen.
Yeah, I think he lost his connection.
Okay, Blair, I think we lost you. So if he comes back on, maybe we can just wrap up. Patrick, do you want me to share the results of this last poll?
I already did. Look,
Oh, you did? Yes, you did. I'm sorry.
So, Kim, you see that?
I did. So I'm just curious, we have like a minute left. Is anybody else in the participation would like to share their thoughts on anything we've discussed here today, any takeaways, even if you want to jump in on some of the poll results?
The floor is open.
Kim, do you want to maybe I'm sorry, we've got someone, John, do you want to share?
I was just going to say, taking it a step further, I'd like to know if the companies that are expressing support for Black Lives Matter are going to back it up with action, because everybody's talking about it. But a year from today, I wonder what we'll see from all of these corporate names that have been making great statements. Was it lip service? I mean, they may be very sincere, but they got to do something too.
You know, John, there's a really great article that was just published by the chief editor for the CEO for the SHRM organization, in which he mentioned, he went off and pulled some early stats on the success rate of the equality, diversity, and inclusion functions within these different organizations and why they are failing across the board. So I am inclined to believe that with these types of conversations with individuals, you know, being brave to just like stand up and be more vocal in a productive way, in a very self-conscious and altruistic way, and communicating what they're experiencing on both sides. It has to happen on both sides. That will then be able to feed into more, I guess you could say, better vetted and designed EDI programs that we're seeing being stood up inside these different organizations. You know, will some of them just kind of fall to the wayside? I'm sure they will, but there will be some organizations that truly take this to heart, and those organizations are going to be what we're going to use as our case studies moving forward. They're going to be able to send their knowledge experts out into the field to say, hey, let's help get these other companies in line and step with what works and how and why it works.
I look forward to that one.
Thank you guys so much. So, you know, we launched the last poll question. It was, you know, do you feel your employer has adequately expressed or made clear their stance on current climate around racial injustice? 73% of you said yes. The other, 69% of you said yes. The other 31% of you said no. So with that being said, Kim, I know we're over time here, but you know what, if you maybe just want to address that and wrap it up, and I know Patrick, you may want to share something as well. And thank you guys so much for coming. And this is a great conversation today. Patrick, I'm getting a lot of questions in the chat about whether or not this is being recorded, and I can see that it is, but I think we may want to make it available to folks.
Yes, it is being recorded, and we will make it available.
Okay.
As long as yeah, we'll make it available. It's great.
All right, so to quickly address the question about employers adequately addressing the issues, let me make sure I have the question, I'm reading it correctly. I don't want to misquote it. Thank you. Do you feel your employer has adequately expressed or made clear the stance on the current climate around racial injustice? And 70% of employees of the respondents said yes. Well, I mean, that's all relative. I'm glad that people feel that way, because it means that you more than likely you're experiencing greater psychological security in your workplace, and you're feeling that you're with an employer that speaks to your values. So hopefully that whatever they're doing that you're finding is meeting that is something that is truly impactful, not only internally, but in the community. And for the 30% that said no, then I would have to ask you why, and ask yourself why. And when you go and you're speaking to those people, to what Blair also was speaking about, that trust factor, those people you may find that you trust in the organization, you may start to have those quote unquote water cooler conversations about what people think about what the company is doing around the climate with race and diversity in the workplace. And maybe be that person who really gets the conversation to the next level, that gets, I should say, a deeper level, something that's not as surface, but let's really get into the DNA of the matter in the company. So if you really feel that, then, you know, it kind of is horrible to say, but it has been true. Those that are typically feeling the brunt of the, let's call it the oppressive state, the adverse state, we typically have to be the ones that really take the stand and push it forward, because otherwise you have to make the other side recognize their level of uncomfortability by making sure that it's always there. They have to see it. If we just go back to things as was, just, you know, okay, you bought Starbucks for 250,000 Black Lives Matter shirts. Did that solve the problem? No, it did not. You know, someone donated all this money to Netflix. Did that solve the problem? No, it did not. Did it possibly give us the opportunity to get greater education out there? Yes. But what do we do with that? How do we track what efforts are having a significant impact on moving this needle to having Black Lives Matter be a real thing, and we really experience it, and having greater diversity and inclusion happen within all of these organizations? So it still falls to those, quite honestly, who are experiencing it, to keep it alive, and those who are in the position that's taking up, quote unquote, more than their fair share, to kind of move over some, and they have to give. Everyone has to give in this situation. So that would be my response to.
Kim, I think your volume went out. There, you back now.
Yeah, it says you muted me, so I figured you wanted to be quiet, so I stopped talking.
I didn't do that.
No, I am so sorry. I heard a lot of background noise as you were talking, and I clicked you, and I just panicked over here. I am so sorry. I did not mean to do that.
But that was the end of it.
I do want to say a hearty thank you to you for joining the Heart Method this evening and sharing your perspective on having these uncomfortable conversations. I think we've had healthy dialogue, and this is one of those conversations that you can really take back and apply tomorrow at work. And that's what it's all about, is how to change the world. We've got to change the landscape of the world that we're in today. And I just say, what I heard was real simple. You said a lot of powerful things this evening, Kim, and I want to thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
You always have a great perspective, and I appreciate you for that. But what I heard is, one of the first tips that I gave, and I think is all about listening. You know, it's so often we hear people, but we don't really listen to understand. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we all can do on both sides of this conversation, is listen. Then the other thing is, and I say this all the time, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And so I think if we all remember those two things, and all the things, these wonderful tips that Kim has shared this evening, you can sit down and have some of these conversations and not be so uncomfortable and have so much anxiety. Because I'm telling you, when you get, and I'm gonna leave on this note, and this is a powerful, and I'm gonna close out on it. So, because Sonia made a good point. Sonia said vice versa. It goes back and it goes both ways. It really does. And as a Black person, we always have to, it's easy for us to say, that's a John is an average white man. He doesn't, he has white privilege. He has X, Y, and Z. When George Floyd happens, it was quiet around my organization. And then we got this email from the CEO, and he talked about how we don't support racial injustice. He went on about how we as an organization, we're about diversity and inclusion. And he had one sentence, he says, and I understand because I have 2 Black children of my own. And you could have picked me up I said, what? But my point is that when you start having conversations, you find out those little small nuggets and realize you have more in common with everybody than you think. That's why I say the beauty is in the conversation. So I appreciate everyone joining tonight. This has been great dialogue, great conversation.
Yes.
Till next time. Take care.
Till next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.